Hey everyone, so thanks for joining me on yet another episode of my ongoing interview series. This series highlights people who do interesting and or extraordinary things. And so my aim is to get out there and actually get to know these people, not just what they do and what they're known for. So in this episode, I'm going to say episode, but it's really going to be episodes. I'm going to be talking to longtime comic books pro John Beatty. John has been worked on many pieces that you'll see behind me here throughout the years, and has basically worked on some of the most iconic books ever released in comics. From Secret Wars to Punisher, he's been all over the place. Batman, you name it, he's probably done it. So, fascinating guy. I'm going to go ahead and break this interview up into multiple pieces. For the simple fact is, the interview went about 2 hours, so that might be a little bit too long for most people, and so I figured I'd break it up into nice bite-sized chunks for the viewing public. But anyway, so that's why this format's going to be a little different than a lot of the other ones. But anyway, enjoy the 15-20 minute snippets and make sure to watch the whole thing to get an amazing view into the comic books industry as seen by a pro working within it. So anyway, thanks for watching, and be sure to check out the rest of the videos that will follow this one. All right, thanks again. Genome out. Hey everyone, Genome here, coming at you with the next episode in my interview series. This is the series where I take a look at people who do interesting and or extraordinary things. Today's guest and I actually have something of a history. I met him once, over 20 years ago, maybe 25 years ago, back in my comic book collecting heyday. And I'm talking about none other than comic books pro John Beatty. John, how you doing this fine day?
Hey, David, I'm doing well. How about you?
Oh, great. If I can just get this lag issue figured out with the recording, but we're going to try to work through it since we've been trying to get this interview going together so long. So
yep.
Today we're going to learn a little bit about John, not about just about what makes him tick, but also his start in the industry and, just some reminiscing about some times of working in basically, some would say, the golden age, not the golden age, but the golden era of comics. That's waxing poetic a bit. So let's go ahead and get into just a little bit about you. So John, tell us a little bit about yourself, like where you're from, family, that sort of thing.
Okay, well, I was originally born in Kentucky and didn't stay there long, maybe 3 months. And my family moved down to Florida, which I am very grateful for because I love the warm weather. And so I've stayed here ever since. I'm in the Daytona Beach area. I lived in Orlando for 10 years, but came back to Daytona, and I've been here ever since. Don't plan on leaving.
Yeah, it's Florida. Florida's an interesting state, man. I'm a Florida native myself, and I lived there for about 35 of my 43 years. So I'm quite a fan of Florida in some ways, mostly Central Florida. And I was going to ask you. So, growing up in Florida, as you have, what kind of changes have you seen around the state, for good or for bad, as compared to like when you were in your youth?
Well, of course, like any other city, it has grown. Daytona has not grown as much in size as the Central Florida area. When I lived in Orlando from 1990 to mid-2001, you could actually get around the city in the afternoon and stuff. You wouldn't have to worry so much about traffic. Now, if I need to go over there for something, I'll still try to go on a Tuesday or Wednesday sometime, say 2 o'clock or something after people are out for lunch, but they're still into work. But things have changed. It's not easy to get around Orlando anymore. Any day, anytime. You're just, you're in for maddening traffic. And I know enough about Orlando to kind of get around, but it's constantly changing. They're doing construction on I-4 right now, which is a nightmare. They should have done that many decades ago.
Yeah, I lived in Orlando for over a quarter of a century, so I can feel your pain, and I know all about it. I recently left there in, 2012 or 13, whatever it was.
Okay, yeah, you got the big growth in.
Yeah, I saw it at its worst, and it was still getting bad. They didn't have the flyover passovers, whatever it is they have nowadays back then. So
well, they're just now, those are, like I said, the ones on I-4 are just now being built, all that, the real big ones and stuff, and whenever you have to go through 4 and, everything's constantly changing because they're building this over here and building that over there. So I don't like going through there right now.
Well, no one does. If anyone is not familiar with I-4, basically think of like traffic outside of LA, and you get kind of an idea of how bad it really is any given busy peak time. So anyway, enough about traffic. We'll go on to more positive things. So so living in Daytona Beach is an interesting place. I spent many an hour there as a youth. Beach towns are really funny places. People think, it's all like Ron John Surf Shop, and it's a lot different for the locals. So, you see yourself ever leaving Daytona, or is the beach life for you? Is that it for permanent?
It's not necessarily the beach for me because I'm not a beach person. I burn extremely easy, so I'm not a sun worshiper. I just like the warm weather. I like the town here. I mean, it's got its faults, but any town does. But I know it. I'm familiar with it, and it's just something that I'm familiar with. So the building that I have my studio in right now, I'm in downtown Daytona Beach, and I'm in a S&H Crest building, which used to be a Five and Dime. That when I was a kid, I used to come down here and shop downtown. That used to be the big thing, and so now they have it's like a office building type situation now.
Yeah, it's a little bit saddening in a way too. Like a lot of those kind of businesses have shut down just because of online work, and the big super centers kind of shut down a lot of the smaller guys. So a lot of those old familiar landmarks that people went to shopping or eating, whatever, at least in my recollection, are basically going the way of the dodo now. So a little bit depressing, but at least it opened up a shop for you, right? So
yeah, well, like I said, it downtown used to be where everyone came. When I was a kid, it was the place it was the only place to come shopping, really. Then they built a smaller mall, and that started to kill downtown. Mm-hmm. Then there's a mall that was built across from the racetrack, which killed the initial mall that came in. And now we have a outlet mall that's being built out it's built, but they're continuing to add on, and it's slowly killing the business the mall that destroyed everything else. So it's like a pecking order, so to speak. It's
vicious cycle there. Just curious, what kind of car were you driving downtown around those years?
My first car that I ever owned was a '73 Dodge Charger that my dad bought me.
Well, that's starting off with a royalty for your first car.
Well, it was a nice car. I enjoyed it.
Oh, good times. So, all right. So speaking of the 70s, you started getting some of your first commissions back in the later 70s, correct?
Well, not really. What I did when I was 16, I actually worked for a local publishing company, Camelot Publishing, and they did books on. It was a one-man operation. His name is Donald Spencer. And there was an ad in the local newspaper for a cartoonist. My sister saw it. She brought me down to the office. I showed him some cartoons I did. He sent me home with 5 drawings he needed done for I think $10 a piece. Mm-hmm. I did them in a day or maybe a day and a half and brought them back, and he gave me a check for $50 and 3 or 4 more drawings. And I was like, wow. This is great. So I developed a relationship with him, and I illustrated more books and spot illustrations for him. And then I was actually I didn't know it at the time, but his daughter was in the same grade as I was, and we went to high school together. And he wanted to know if I could come work and help out, even doing the old where you would typeset on this huge machine, and then develop the typesetting. You'd have to wax the pages and work on a light table and lay out the books and stuff like that. So that was back before desktop publishing. So
how the game has changed.
I know the old school way too.
Oh, good. Well, that's an interesting way to get your start there. Did you ever fill out or do those what were those drawings? Like the turtle guy you had to draw and all that. Those practice ones you used to send in for the art ratings or whatever.
Well, people used to always come up and give those to me, like, "Hey, you should try this," and I'm like, "No, because I knew it was just to sell you an art course, So, I mean, I think I probably did because it was a little, thing in the newspaper where you could copy a drawing. So I'm sure I probably did it at one point, but not with the intention of sending it in and, getting the course. Now, having said that, I do remember now that I think my mom and dad sent away for, I think I saw it somewhere or something, and there was, it was like a cartooning course at home, and they basically sent you these books, and you were to do the exercises, send them in, and then, week or 2 weeks later, you would get your assignments corrected. I do remember that jogged my memory about that. I totally forgot about that, and I wish I still had that set of books because I'd like to look back and see exactly what was involved. But that was, that's an interesting memory. I'd forgotten totally about that.
Yeah, I remember. Well, I'm so artistically disinclined that I couldn't even trace that stuff. It was so bad. But like I was similar. Like when I used to write a lot of stuff, and I can look back at. I kept very little of when I was younger of my writings. I look back at now. I was like, oh my gosh, this is awful. So I wonder what it'd be like for an artist who's going back to their first start. It's like, oh, I was pretty good at arms back then, but my legs were terrible or whatever. So yeah, that is kind of interesting. So you started attending cons back in the early '80s, correct?
Now that I was probably, I think the first convention I went to was either in 1975 or 76, which was an Orlando con. And, I think I was 15 or 16. About that same period of time, things started to happen as far as artwork. And I saw that it was announced, and it was going to be like in this Howard Johnson's over right off of I-4 and Colonial Drive, when there used to be a Hojo's there. So there was the Orlando convention there, and I got to know the guy that put it on, Jim Ivey, some years later. And the great thing about having this show in Orlando is a lot of old strip cartoonists and even some comic book artists had retired and were living in Florida, and Jim would always get them to come to the show.
Interesting.
So, yeah.
Now you met Jim Shooter, right, at one of these cons originally?
I originally met Jim Shooter at a Miami convention.
And did you have work that you showed him at that time, or you just kind of struck up a conversation? He asked you to send him something.
No, I actually had been doing my own fan work. Created my own superheroes and would make a little story about them. Would do kind of like pinup drawings and stuff like that. And I would show those to Shooter. But before that, I had met Mike Zeck by writing a fan letter to him through the Rocket Splash Comic Collector. It was more like a prozine than a fanzine. And I actually got a reply back from Mike, and Mike saw enough talent in what I sent him to actually work with me. He took what I sent and he drew over it with tracing paper and made some suggestions and stuff like that. And on top of that, he sent me, I think he was working on a fill-in issue of Master of Kung Fu, and he sent me maybe half the book of penciled photocopies full size so that I could practice my inking on those, which was really cool, and really shocked me when I got a reply from him. And that was the beginning of Mike and I forming the relationship that has lasted 40 plus years.
Yeah, we're definitely going to be talking a little bit more about you and Mike together here shortly. As far as going to cons and showing your work, is this something that you would recommend to anyone who's aspiring to get into the business, to bring your work with you and kind of just talk to the pros there? Or is this something that should be done offline in a different venue? What's your opinion on that?
Well, the way the conventions are run now, unless there's an actual person on hand that's doing a portfolio review from a company or, somebody that can give you work. I mean, professionals, we might have time to look at your work. We might have time to give you a critique. But sometimes it's not the best setting unless there's like a time, scheduled to do that. And usually there's not anymore. That's one of the main things that's changed about the business is how you break in. When I broke in, there was a protocol where, editors were looking for people, and they would be at conventions, and, they could actually either, take your address or have you write them, send you something to do as a tryout. That's basically what happened with me. When I got to the point where Jim Shooter thought that I was ready to break in at one of the Miami shows, he basically told me if I get to New York City, he would give me a paid tryout, meaning I would get paid to do the work. And it would be a tryout to see, if I was going to get more work from Marvel. So at that point, my exec had moved to Connecticut, and luckily for me, we had remained in touch with each other quite a bit. And Mike said, "Hey, get a plane ticket. Let me know when you can come up." And he basically took me into Marvel, and we got the tryout job. And on top of that, like the week before we went in, I stayed at his apartment and worked up even newer samples. And one of them was a cover to, I think it was Master of Kung Fu 96 or 97. And I lightboxed that over his pencils, and that was one of my samples. And he had the pencils for the next cover also. We showed that to Jim. Jim looked at Mike and said, "This looks pretty good. What do you think?" And Mike goes, "Yeah, I like it." And he goes, "Okay, so we'll buy this cover, and you can ink the next one." And so I don't know what happened to the pencils for the one that I lightboxed. I know Mike took them back. I don't know what happened to them, but the next cover, the second cover, like I said, 96, 97, 98, somewhere in there. I actually inked on Mike's pencils when I returned. Plus, he gave me, it was a 5-page job that Carl Potts, I think because Carl and I laughed that we're glad that it never saw print. It was Carl's tryout story for penciling. So I had his tryout story to do my tryout inking on.